All right, today is a better day than Hardcore Classic releasing. It is Tuesday, a week before patch 11.0.7, and we are back with episode 21 of The Bench, powered by Wowhead. Are you guys stoked for the patch or what?
11.07 hype?
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of hype around this patch, right?
Well, there's not actually a lot of content, right? There's like a new island. They're changing up some races a little bit. We get a new ring that's available. Do you even know how this ring works?
It's basically very similar to the amulet. If you played the last expansion, you put gems in a ring, and the ring currently sucks.
Oh, it's bad.
It is slightly worse of an equivalent item level ring. It's 619 on week 1. It scales to 639 on week 6. And it seems slightly worse for almost every spec, other than like Ellie Shaman. So if you have like an alt or a character that doesn't have a 639 ring, it'll probably be slightly better than what you have, but It takes 6 weeks to get there.
I mean, surely you're expecting they buff it, right? If that's the current tuning.
Well, they did that with the Onyx Amulet. Do you guys remember that? Like, I remember the Onyx Amulet started, and it was the equivalent of like a 395 ring for Moonkin, and then they buffed it to be like a 430 eye level equivalent, and for some people it's like a 450 eye level equivalent, but it was really bad.
When haven't they done that though? Like they did it with Shards of Domination, they did it with the Amulet. I feel like every system they usually end up undertuning it and then retuning it mid-season.
They got a new island. They're updating some of the races, but I don't think that any of the races actually look like they're going to be impactful in terms of actual end-game stuff. Maybe just like slight quality of life improvements and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. The patch is mainly there for the people who are still playing the game, like still enjoying it, just want to do something when they log in. Like, I don't really think it's meant to be like, the patch that, oh, everybody come back. Like, I think you can't have that high of expectations for it.
Yeah, that's next patch, I think.
That's
the comeback patch.
That's Plunderstorm.
Plunderstorm, true.
Officially announced January 14th, I believe. So we have a date for it now. Growl is going to be in Plunderstorm, I'm sure, farming all the players.
Is there any word on any sort of like tournament or like event that they're doing? To me, I think a lot of the fun in Plunderstorm last time, and obviously I'm a little biased here because I was in it, but was sort of like the event that was going on, because not only was there like, all of us who actually cared about getting better at it, but also like, now everybody wants to join the streamer lobbies and kill them, and like, there was like showdowns and stuff. So I feel like if they don't do any sort of event, I don't know. I mean, it'll still be fun to play, but I think the excitement will die down a lot faster than the first time, especially with no new, like, I don't know. I guess we still don't know. Maybe there's a lot of new stuff.
I think it's also kind of dependent on timing, because I feel like this Plunderstorm is releasing in a very different time for the landscape of what World of Warcraft looks like, because I think that right now you have like classic and hardcore being the taking up a lot of people's attention, and you have like the new Sod season and stuff like that. I wonder if that's still going to be captivating people's attention to the point where Plunderstorm isn't going to be played as much, because whenever they launched Plunderstorm last time, it was in largely a dead time.
I mean, yeah, there's so much stuff going on right now. I feel like I'm sure you guys have noticed just the absolute massive, like, a little bit off topic from WoW, but like the, December gaming advertiser blitz. It feels like every day all the big streamers are like playing some sponsored game. Not naming any games, but I'm sure you guys all know the games that I'm talking about. Also, PoE 2 came out. Feels like there's just so much stuff to do.
You're talking about.
That is one of them. I feel like there's enough hype around PoE 2 that even if it wasn't sponsored, but that is certainly one of the games doing the blitz right now.
Fair enough.
There's just a lot of hype outside of WoW, I think. I think it's making WoW look less appealing, but I think, like you said, as soon as next patch comes around, like the actual patch, and they release the new dungeons and the new season, especially if they recooked up something with the affixes, I feel like I'm looking forward to the return to WoW once that time happens.
We kind of talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I think that this is just like the change of how World of Warcraft has just kind of progressed over time, where they're not trying to make it the only game that you ever play and captivate your attention for 7 consecutive months. Instead, they're going to be like, yeah, play it as much as you want, and if you aren't enjoying it by the end of the season, you just don't have to play it as much anymore. And I feel like that's part of it, right? At some point, you're just going to kind of get a little bit bored, and you're going to go on to a different game, and then you're going to come back. They kind of expect you to come back.
Yeah. I mean, I think 1107 could be like a time to make some adjustments to the game just for postseason or for returning players. We talk about Crest literally every episode, but Crest, something with Crest. I always say late season dinars would be so fun. Unlimited catalyst charges for people who want transmogs or anything like that, and maybe a final nerf to like bosses or something. Just like I like making it kind of like a last ditch effort type thing. I think that's usually fine, but I don't think they should need to do more than that.
I don't know if they necessarily need late season dinars. I think they need to rework the vault to be something a little bit more deterministic than what it currently is. I think
it's crazy. It's crazy. People say that, man. Like, I swear, back in BFA, the vault was like the biggest stinking pile of crap. Where literally, no matter what, you get one chest, one item, your Mythic plus chest, and then now it's like you get these like currencies, and you have like a backup. You can buy sockets, and you have all these choices, and you can do delves, and people are still complaining about it.
Okay, let me cook for a second. I think the tiered medallion setting has actually made the vault even more worthless than it was even like last expansion. And I don't mean like worthless, but there is significant diminishing returns on the items that you get out of the vault every single week, and to the point where it ends up becoming where you actually don't really get an upgrade on weeks 4, 5, 6, right? I feel like everybody kind of runs into that issue, and it was good because long term you would actually start picking up sockets last expansion, but now this expansion you actually don't pick up sockets almost at all because the tiered medallion setting has kind of erased that possibility.
Yeah.
That's why I kind of think that maybe it should be something a little bit more deterministic. Like if you're able to save up 12 of those tokens, you can upgrade a piece from Hero Track to Myth Track, something like that, where, and I'm like, you have to get the item to begin with. And so there's still an acquisition process. But I think that like, if you're committing 2 vaults, maybe you should be able to upgrade an item or have something that's a bit more deterministic like that.
Yeah, I think the big problem arises when it becomes the correct play to commit 2 vaults. Like, I feel like when you have 2 unlucky vaults in a row, it's like, oh, this feels good. I get, to do something good with it. But when you're sitting there on week 1 of the patch and the correct play is to like take a dinar or the thingies or whatever to like upgrade your Bis trinket to
I don't like that.
Yeah, that's I think the biggest problem with anything like that. But I do agree that, I don't know. I think it's hard for me. Like, I feel like I've been seeing a lot of complaints about systems or like the way things are, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I guess like now looking at the span of like from BFA until now, it just feels like everything has just gotten better. Like it's hard for me to complain about the vault when I just remember what it was like in BFA and even Shadowlands to an extent.
I don't think the vault's bad, but I do think it's over time gotten worse since the beginning of Dragonflight. I think that the first season of Dragonflight was probably the best that we had with the vault, where crafted gear, actually being able to get that additional spark was actually a huge deal, and crafted gear was at a premium. There was also you had desire to actually get more of the sockets, and so every single week, even if you had to take the tokens out of the vault, you would actually convert that into a crafted piece, which was super valuable for a very long time. You would also convert that into sockets, which were again super valuable for a really long time. And I think if the vault has a bit more staying power like that, I think it will be a better system. And I'm not saying that it's obviously much better than what we had in like BFA. BFA, that thing was a piece of shit, and it was better than what we had in Shadowlands. But I do think it's a little bit regressing, and I think that like long term, I think that there should be something there for players who want to continue to play into week 10, week 11, week 12 of the season, where you're basically getting nothing out of the vault.
I'd be a fan of a reroll system, I think. I don't know that they want to do anything deterministic from the vault. I feel like that goes against what they've been trying to do. I'd support a reroll system.
I would support anything that gives the vault a bit more longevity. Obviously, the deterministic part would be the easiest thing, the easiest solve, but I think that anything that gives it a bit more longevity is appreciated. Like, when was the last time you actually got an upgrade out of the vault? Like, either of you?
Dude,
I've actually, I think I've taken upgrades and gotten things from my vault basically every single week. Now, granted, I didn't do a vault last week, And then the week before that, which I apparently made some commenters very angry that I got a Spy Masters on my priest when I stopped playing. But for the most part, like I've actually noticed that I struggled getting, like I'm not fully socketed because I almost can never take sockets from my vault, and I'm actually still short 2 Mythic Plus trinkets. Like I haven't gotten any Myth Track trinkets yet that I want to use.
It's so interesting that you have that dynamic, and I have like 3 sockets sitting in my bag and 6
Really?
tokens. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I've gotten a good vault in like a month and a half.
Oh wow!
I think I've gotten.
Granted, I mythic raid and I was fed gear, but like,
Yeah,
I've been looking for stuff for a while. I haven't seen a single cloak. I haven't seen a single ring.
Yeah, I guess my situation was a little weird too because I started off like raid Holy Priest and I was like taking different items and it itemizes very different from M plus disc. So like I definitely took a lot of vaults that are probably like duds now that I don't care about. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like at least the way I like compared to the end of Dragonflight when gearing got so fast, like I feel like vaults stayed more like more relevant longer than last expansion most of the seasons.
I agree. I think that the vaults have stayed a bit more relevant longer and the gearing process has been longer, but I think that there's a lot of people who actually quit whenever they hit like 630 item level. They were like, the season's over for me. I'm not going all the way up to 637, 638, which is like the gear cap. They just like kind of were like, all right, I'm done with the season. I'll be back next season. So I'm not even sure if elongating out the gearing process actually solved what they were trying to solve with it.
Maybe. I mean, it still provides a weekly upgrade every week of percent and a bit, probably. So,
do you like the crafting system? Do you like it being 90 crests? Do you like the fact that the crafting gear is pretty relevant long term?
I mean, 90 crests is because you're going to like Myth 506, right? So you're paying what is essentially a premium for not having a Myth piece in that slot, plus all the crests that you're missing there. I don't necessarily hate it. It does suck that 90 crests is your entire week of crests, though. Like, does it make sense? Yes. Does it feel bad? Yes. Yeah, I think that's about where that like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but it does feel bad when you're like, this week's crests are going to a crest upgrade or to a crafted upgrade.
I didn't like craft much because I feel like it was like pretty hard to craft if you were continuously taking upgrades out of your vault, like, or especially early on, if you would ever like have a piece from raid the previous week and then you take a piece out of your vault. I think it was pretty difficult to actually get like justify it.
It changed the crafting dynamic to something you want to do as a last resort.
Yeah.
Rather than something that you should do every week. Because in Dragonflight, you basically crafted every chance you got, I'm pretty sure. Because it saved you crests. Now, crafted gives you, loses you crests, but is one of the only ways to get it if you don't have a myth track piece, which is just harder in this expansion. So.
I don't mind it. I don't mind it, but I do think it's... it does feel a little bit weird to not want to craft like ever.
Yeah, it's definitely really weird. The system as a whole is like very, I think, unintuitive. I think is my biggest problem with it. Like the fact that the best play is basically, okay, craft the single best item starting off, which would be like your weapon because it's so stat heavy. But technically that's not even your BIS. Like most people would rather get a 639 weapon, but you're like the chances of you getting that is not very high. So you craft a weapon and then then at some point you start switching to crafting, like Squishy said, like low priority pieces, like last resort, like, bracers or belt or something. And it's like, I feel like it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And it feels like a whole lot of people don't really interact with the system. I think it's cool for those that do on both sides. Like, I think the crafting side of it, of like doing your weekly thing or your like quests and keeping your knowledge up and expanding like the different things you can craft, and like the idea of specializing in something early on, like all those things are cool. But like, let's be honest, like nobody really does it, and you just go into trade chat and you deal with the crafting cartel and like the people who actually theory craft like what's best to craft. It's probably interesting, but I think for a huge chunk of the player base, you sort of just like either go into trade chat and get something made, and then you type into Google, what do I craft? Or you look at Wowhead, and then like that's pretty much all you do with the system.
Yeah.
Dude, I've seen a lot more complaints about people complaining about retail, bashing retail more and more as time has gone on. I wonder, like, I feel like I can't figure out exactly what the problem is, because it seems like a lot of people are actually just like citing very small things, but seeing a lot of people talking about what their take is on with what's wrong with retail, it makes me wonder if the replayability of the content itself is not high enough, where people are just not as engaged with the game anymore.
It's hard because I think in current year it's just hard to do that, you know? Like the idea, like I think as they release more expansions, like people, or sorry, in classic, you know, mop or whatever, I think people will enjoy them. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think they're gonna have the same sort of magic. You know, like there's so many people that I bet if you asked them when they played Kata or mop, they were so addicted and they were logging in every day and like doing. But like you know, the way people game and digest information and like do things nowadays, it just isn't. You know, everyone's so crazy advanced and like fiending for new stuff to do, and it's like it's just so hard to keep up that pace, especially considering how many types of people play WoW, right? Like there are people that play WoW that only want to do the heroic raid, or there are people that only do the quest stuff, or there's the, you know, the achievement hunters and the mount farmers and the high mythic plusers, and trying to create months and months of content for every single one of those players is just like an unattainable task. And I think you just sort of have to like pick and choose what you enjoy in the game and just kind of like, well, you know, okay, I don't really enjoy that much this patch, but I think I guess just kind of looking at everything and like, I don't know, I feel like things are trending in a good direction. I feel like they've done a better job listening to people. And do I agree with all the changes or all of them good? No, but I'm generally happy with the way retail's going.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with retail. Any discussion point is just usually something small that would make it more enjoyable. I think most of the like long-term complaints have kind of moved away.
This is what I think I see a lot of. It's like I just don't really have a desire to play, which I think that to me is a little bit more concerning than anything else, right? It's less the minor complaints. It's more just like I'm not having fun. I don't have a desire to play right now.
Yeah, I mean the Mythic Plus situation I do think is a problem.
What part of it?
Pugging.
What do you think? Yeah, well,
I mean, we've discussed this a lot, and we're going to touch a little bit more on it today, but like...
And we're going to keep discussing it on every episode of The Bench. The dead horse is on the ground, and it is being beat.
No, okay, we're not talking about it. What we're talking about today is we're talking about healing power for a little bit, and we're going to also talk about key depletion. So, not exactly.
But yeah, I mean... I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. The season started in September.
Yeah.
It's now December. That's October. 3 months.
Yeah.
It's not bad. Like, granted, I think maybe you could criticize the fact that it's 3 months every 6 months, but for people who only play WoW, I get it. Like, you want to play your favorite game more. I get it. But for people who don't want to just play WoW, like, this is a great time to go play other games.
I will say, it kind of feels a little bit weird that we're not going to get the next patch until like February or March. And I'm just like, well, I'm ready for the patch now. Like, I've got to play out this patch. I think that to me is the part that feels a little bit weird with the entire thing. And we still have like 2-ish months, probably maybe even like 3 months ahead of us.
Do you feel like alt gearing and alt friendliness and crests has an impact on that? Like, let's say hypothetically, if you could log in right now and you could pick any, like, let's say you had a ticket and you could cash it in, you could get a fully geared bis character of another, you know, whatever you wanted, right? And then you could play it in M plus or raid. Would that encourage you? Do you think you would play more and start, you know, oh, let me try and push keys on this guy or raid on this guy? Or do you think it wouldn't really change how you feel about the patch?
I don't think it would. Like, dude, I'm actually still playing a lot. I'm actually still enjoying the game, and I've honestly been contemplating like starting raiding again. Like I started gearing my Moonkin because that would be my raid character. So I've actually contemplating jumping back into raiding again. So like for me, it's one of those things that it's just like I don't think it actually has anything to do with like alt gearing. It's just I'm done with this content and I'm ready for the next set of content because I feel like I've done the dungeons enough where I'm over it. I've done the raid enough where I'm over it. I'm not like bis gear because the Spy Master's Web won't drop and nobody will sell this stupid ass trinket to me. But like beyond that, I don't really have anything to like do that's like productive for me left in the patch. Like I've accomplished pretty much everything I wanted to accomplish with the patch.
Yeah, that's I think like the biggest complaint that I've seen is the sorry to cut you off, is
No,
the crests, right? About like people feeling like they can't truly play their alts now that they've sort of, mythed out a lot of their items,
Sure.
and they're like, well, I could play an alt, but it's 619 and like blah blah blah. That's I think the biggest complaint about, what Dragonflight or what previous expansions had better in terms of replayability. So that's kind of why I asked that.
I'm not a huge alt guy, just generally speaking. But yeah.
For me, like I did 1610s this week. Why? I don't know. But I mean, let's be honest here. If this was a bolstering or sanguine or some crappy affix week, I would not have done 16 keys. They're
Sure.
still semi fun just to go in and blast. Like, I think they made steps for just kind of going in and having fun with your pals, just getting some upgrades or chasing something from the vault. I think that's perfectly fine. But I do think that the crest changes extended the goalpost and has turned off a lot of people because they see that they're, in order to gear up an alt, it would take a lot longer. And my personal opinion, I think a lot of people want a goal that seems attainable and is able to chase that goal rather than actually getting the character at max item level.
It's weird because it's less long than it was in previous expansions.
I mean, it doesn't matter though. The perception is that Myth 6 of 6 takes a lot longer than Myth 4 of 4, and no matter how long the crest actually takes, people want the rewards. People want the grind. They want to see their number go up every week after week.
Yeah, maybe it is
I'm
slower than
thinking that's what
Dragonflight
the case
though.
is.
Yeah, it is slower than Dragonflight seasons aside from season 1, but it's faster than like every other expansion ever. So it's kind of interesting to see the dynamic from a player's perspective where it's still not. Maybe it's a perception thing. Maybe you're right.
I think it's just a perception thing of people want a goal that feels attainable.
Yeah.
And getting a gear character to Myth 6 out of 6 doesn't exactly feel attainable or worth your time. And that's when you just don't do it. But if there was a crest catch up, despite the absurd number of crests that you would need, there's at least a path, something that you could enjoy doing. Oh, I'm excited to kind of gain some of my levels on my, on my character today by doing some Mythic Plus. That's something that players will do.
Maybe this is like the idiot gambler poker player in me, but do you think this is not really proof, but like a demonstration of why deterministic gearing is bad or less fun? Because like realistically, in any other patch ever in WoW's history, gearing like doing 90 dungeons to be full bis is like probably normal, right? Like it's probably not that crazy if you think about every single slot bis, right? Like chances are you're probably doing close to 100 dungeons, whether it's literally vanilla WoW or Cataclysm or Shadowlands, to get every single piece bis, it's probably about 100 dungeons, right? But I feel like
it was
the
time gated in
randomness,
those.
but the randomness element of like you might get your item on the first try or whatever, like I feel like helps people get pushed through it and play it and enjoy it more. Whereas like when it's literally just do every dungeon gives you X crests and then you get a piece, like it's like boring and like it feels grindy and people don't enjoy it. Am I crazy here? Like, I don't know. I've always been kind of like a randomness idiot and like someone who's pushed back a little bit on like super deterministic gearing just because of this, right? Like you look at a piece of paper and it just says, okay, run 90 of any dungeon, and then okay, now you're done. And it's like, man, this is boring.
What did you think of Dragonflight Season 4? Did you think the gearing system was better or worse than that of Season 3?
So in terms of me getting all of the things that I wanted and being able to do keys, it was better. Like I just got my pieces, I got my dinars, I bought what I wanted. Honestly though, I mean, in terms of like, I think gearing is really fun and I like the gearing process. And I think that like, it's just two different types of things that I like, I guess. So I don't, the gearing, I wouldn't say was particularly fun. Like it was just, I do it and I get it out of the way. Like, I don't know. Yeah. It's an interesting question. If you were to ask me what I think the best gearing is, right?
Yeah, because it's kind of interesting because you say that you wouldn't want those things, but we had it during a season and a lot of people actually liked it during the season. I personally was also a fan of having that deterministic loot. It felt a lot better for me as somebody who isn't rating, right? So I was actually able to buy those nice pieces.
Well, when you give people more rewards and you give people what they want, it's always going to feel better,
of course,
right, at the time. Yeah. So like there was an interesting talk about, I want to say it was Diablo 3 probably, where they did a week or weekend event, like an anniversary thing, where they doubled the drop rates of every item. And everyone was like, this is great. Like, this is the greatest weekend I've ever had. And then they turned it off and everyone's like, wait, I hate this game now. This sucks. Like, you can't, the dopamine switch can only go in one direction, I feel like a lot of times. And it's hard to appreciate the, like just because you're, like, I guess I always take it to the extreme, right? Of like, okay, well, what if you logged in day one of the patch and you were full BIS, right? Like, to me, that's not good. Like, to me, I would not enjoy that. And it's like, I worry every time you push the dopamine in one direction of like more gear, a faster gear, more deterministic gear. Eventually, you cross the point of no return, right? Where it's like,
oh, absolutely,
now gearing isn't even fun.
Yeah, I mean that's Blizzard's job, though, right? Like it's not like my job.
Yeah, but that's our job as guys who are talking about WoW to talk about.
Yeah, I guess I mean it is Blizzard's job to really.
You're just the mouse. You're just the mouse that like hits the switch that wants the pellet to come out. You're like, that's not my job. I'm just gonna keep hitting the pellet, bro.
Dude,
give me my food.
I'm just addicted to crack. I don't know what you mean, man. Please. Like, but yeah, I mean, at the same point, I think that I guess there is some level of responsibility that we have to like kind of articulate our opinions better in that way. But I will say it's like. It's Blizzard's job to know what's the best for player retention long term. And I think that there has to be some healthy balance between player retention and just like creating a game that players find enjoyable. And I think that it's always an never-ending cycle of like, what are people going to enjoy?
Yeah.
Someone was PMing me, emoing out about M+ yesterday, a viewer of mine, and he cited that there are 2/3 of the amount of like people in title range, so basically like total people playing M+, as there were in season 3 of Dragonflight. Does that sound right? Does that sound true?
Well,
wait, say that again.
There's 2/3 of the amount of people now playing Mythic Plus as there were in season 3 of Dragonflight.
They removed M0, or they removed 10 levels of keys.
Ooh, yeah. See, yeah, I guess okay. That makes sense. It's just hard because there's so many different variables, right?
Season 3. So season 3 had, I want to say it was like I'm just looking at NA for the record. I want to say season 3 had like 1,600 people, didn't they?
Yeah, and then apparently right now there's only like 1,000.
Yeah, so it's had 1,479, and right now it's at 1,000. What was Dragonflight season 4 though? Because that was the one that also had the squish in it.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
What were you gonna say earlier, Squishy?
Oh yeah, it's basically on deterministic items. You have two different bad feelings, and it's just a delicate balance. Because the first bad feeling is, like Ralph said, I have to do 10 keys this week to get my item.
Mm-hmm.
These 10 keys are not fun, but I just need to do it. But the other bad feeling is I need to run an infinite number of Grim Battles until my trinket drops. And who knows how long it takes to get that.
Well, it's not infinite. It's maybe one. You might only need to do one Grim Battle and you get your trinket. That's what's
addict.
fun.
Okay, gambling addict.
Oh.
But like capping off the total number of keys that you need to do to guaranteed get the item, I think would satisfy a lot of people, just because then you have a chance of getting the item while you're doing it, and if you happen to get it early, you don't need the end reward. Like let's say in order to get your Skardin's Grace, you activated a quest that was complete 10 Grim Battles. But in those 10 Grim Battles, if you happen to get a Skardin's Grace, you're fucking pog champing because you just get to skip a number of Grim Battles. So I think that's a pretty healthy way of getting of putting in deterministic items while also putting in bad luck protection if you're the unlucky gambling addict.
Well, that's kind of like the Dragonflight legendaries, right? Where like it starts off and it has a very low drop rate, but then every week you don't get it. You like that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't remember those.
I was thinking like Dragonflight legendaries. What the?
I don't. There weren't. You're talking about Shadowlands legendaries, right? Dragonflight.
No, Dragonflight legendaries.
Oh, you're talking about the evoker
the
weapon.
Yeah.
The evoker weapons and the fire rack.
Yeah, the fire rack weapon.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah,
Well,
that's-
I think the difference would be that those items felt really super impactful, so it still felt bad even if you didn't get them, but others wouldn't or whatever. So
I
I
mean,
don't know.
if it's just like a trinket or something you're specifically looking for, I think the feeling, my personal opinion is, I think the feeling of having an unknown amount of time before you get this thing is absolutely horrific and makes me dread every key I do. But knowing that you need to do, an exact number of keys in order to get the thing that you need to get also sucks. So finding that balance where one isn't tipping one way or the other is a really tough position for Blizzard to be in.
Also, it looks like there's about 40% more people who are getting title this season than Dragonflight Season 4. I think it just has to do with the fact that Blizzard cut 10 levels off the bottom.
More of a statistics error. You can't really compare the seasons.
Yeah, because that's the most of the people are going to exist inside that level, right? The 2 to 10 level that pre-existed this current system. Like, especially if you, I think it's one of those things that if you run like one character through a +2, that character is now in the system. But like now that character would have never done a +2. They would have done a delve.
Yep. So you're saying it's delve title for his top 0.1%.
Delvers. Okay, let's talk about some healing power stuff. I saw this very interesting video from Jack, and he talked about, has Blizzard improved healing in the War Within? That was the title of this video, and he went through a bunch of different topics, and I think that this is probably an interesting time to actually be talking about healing power, because there was a lot of great issues that were presented, and we can kind of talk about some of the issues that we had coming out of Dragonflight and kind of have those improved in the War Within. So Growl, I guess gut reaction, is healing better now than it was in Dragonflight?
I would say slightly better. I feel like a lot of the changes that they made were like small band-aids. Like basically, the problem with healing is you want healing to feel impactful, you want it to feel powerful, but sort of like defensives, the more powerful it becomes, if you want to make challenging content, then you have to have more and more damage. And it's like, if you create a healer that can do infinite healing to the raid all the time, one of the only ways that you can actually threaten the raid is to be like, a gotcha where it's like a ton of damage in like 2 seconds and you had to have been ready for it. And that is like not only super not fun, but I think it's super against the spirit of like MMOs. Like, it's one thing if you're playing like a really fast-paced reaction game to have something like that, but I always feel like when it comes to RPGs, and especially WoW, it's the slower pace, like more methodical decision making that makes the game more interesting. And so they did do a few things. I would say 2 things that I would cite specifically. Number one, when it comes to raid, they added more like heal absorb mechanics. So instead of, crazy amount of damage came in and it killed your raid, crazy amount of damage did come in, but you have an amount of time to sort of heal off those absorbs before it actually does something lethal. Brood Twister is an example. I'm trying to think of some of the other bosses that had it, but I feel like they've been trending towards more and more heal absorbs.
Yeah.
Another thing in M+ is I feel like they've moved away from stuff that's sort of one-shotty, but instead given you like, 3 seconds or 4 seconds where it's like definitely very crazy heavy damage, but you have a little bit more time to like press a defensive or realize, oh no, I'm in trouble, let me health potion. It feels like you have a little more agency over your life. So like a lot of the Dawnbreaker bosses, for example, they do tons of party damage, but it's over the course of 4 seconds as opposed to like, for example, in the next season, we have Theater of Pain coming back, the PvP boss that just literally just does a shout and it just does 140% of everybody's health. So when it comes to like little things like that, I think they've done a little bit better from the encounter design perspective, but it's definitely still rough that like, there's just so much, it's so reaction based and pre-planning and like there's just, I think it's it has to do with the defensive creep a little bit more than healing power now, but yeah, it's still, I don't know, like, is it a matter of it's not good design and it's not fun and it's getting worse, or is it a matter of like, we're old, right? And we're gonna be like, the people who play World of Warcraft vanilla, and they're like, oh, the game is too crazy and all these weak auras and mechanics, and Molten Core was the best raid. Like, are we turning into those people where we're just like, oh, there's too many defensives and the damage is too fast? And it's like, I don't know, like maybe this is, in 10 years, WoW is just gonna be like some crazy beat mania, like mashing 50 buttons in 3 seconds, and that's how everybody plays RPGs. I don't know, but to me, it feels like it's trending in a direction where it's way too much about pre-planning and like reactions, and not enough about like, okay, what do I do? Like,
Yeah.
as a tank, for example, this is a big one for tanking too. As a tank, I feel like it should be, okay, I'm in the pack. I'm pressing my defensives. Oh man, like this pack's really hurting. My health is dropping. My healer's falling behind. I'm going to press shield wall. Okay, now I'm stable, right? But nowadays, it's like you walk into a pack and it's like super mega tank buster. And if you don't have shield wall up already, you're just dead in one hit. And it's like, to me, that sort of design is, I don't know, like it's a little bit of a high tier problem, but it's also a little bit not, right? Like I'm sure tons of people who are doing weekly 10s, you walk into Grim Patrol and your tank just dies in 3 seconds anyway, right? Like I don't think it really is just a high tier problem.
Just to expand on that too, I think that is one of the bigger things too of what makes dungeons so difficult now compared to in the past, where if you actually kind of slow down the pace of the dungeons just in terms of the damage intake, if you have fewer casters just in general, it actually makes the dungeon a lot easier to play reactionary as opposed to being proactive. Because I think that one of the hardest things to actually do in Mythic Plus is to have proactive moments where you know the CC chain that's going to happen for a particular pack. You already know who's going to be kicking what in a particular pack. Most people don't play like that. Most people actually just like walk up to the pack, they're holding W, they see the pack that's in front of them, and they're like, how do I tackle this challenge next? And they don't think about the pack that's next in front of them after that. They just think about the pack that's right there. And then they pull it, and then it either kills them or they kill it, and there's like no alternative. But I think that if you, again, like you're saying, slow down the pace of the game, just have fewer casters, if you slow down the damage intake and allow for a little bit more reactionary play, I think it would actually ease up on the difficulty that we've actually been seeing over the course of the last couple of years. That's honestly had a pretty big spike.
Yeah, so in Jack's video, he presented a spreadsheet over the last couple expansions in Raid, which you can see here. And basically, this is comparing the average Raider HP to about an average healer HPS on each of the fights.
Yeah.
And it came with pretty interesting results. This is mostly on, single target bosses, that kind of thing. And what essentially results in an example of time to kill, or how fast you can be healed up, essentially, from 0 to 100. Across the, on average across the entire raid. And with Narrowbar Palace, you see that 6.2 million, 2.6 million HPS on average per healer. That results in an average of, it takes just under a half seconds for a healer to heal every person, or to heal a raider from 0 to 100. And you compare that all the way back to, back when people did a lot of videos, you had Sludge Fist, which is Castle Nathir at 4.1. What were some other really good fights?
Jaina Proudmoore.
Jaina, the slowest at 6.1. You think about healing raid, raw damage doesn't really feel like a thing anymore. Mechanics.
What a crazy sheet you got there. I mean, if that doesn't demonstrate what I'm saying about just the progress of the game and the time to kill, that's absolutely insane.
Yeah, basically,
it's half. It's the time to kill is literally half of of some of the older bosses.
Exactly. The thing is, you double the HP. We have 12 million HP now. It's still mid tier of raid bosses and time to kill.
Oh wow, that is
and that is what Blizzard, when Blizzard has these interviews talking about defensive creep and how hard it is for healers to, or how fast healers can top people off. This is what this is demonstrating.
Dude.
We've gotten progressively faster and faster, and healers are more efficient about topping people up. That the only way for raid encounter designers or even dungeon encounter designers to kill players is to kill them in less than 2 seconds. And who is that fun for?
Nobody.
No one. No player wants to die in less than 2 seconds. But the problem is the healers can heal somebody in just above 2 seconds. So in order to kill somebody, you need 1 shots or like 2 shots. And so what is the solution here? I mean, they talked about it, defensive creep. They've kind of acknowledged that it needs to happen, but they're not willing to do it. Or they can literally like double the HP of everyone in the game, and that might cause a dent in it.
It's so interesting seeing this sheet because I remember Agrimar on Antorus, and I felt like that was the craziest tier I'd ever seen because players had like double legendaries, and Velen's Future Sight was actually the most insane trinket I've ever seen. And I thought that that was going to be like unprecedented for how players were able to, how fast people were actually able to get topped, and seeing that it's like not even close looking back on it, like relative to some of the stuff that we were going to see in the future is bananas. Cause like you can look back, let's see. So whenever they like contact these flames into the boss coming out of this intermission, it actually does like a burst of damage. And Holy Paladin at this time was absolutely bonkers, and they were able to get people topped in just like no time. And seeing that that's a mid-tier boss. This is insane.
You could actually see the health bars ticking down due to rot, right? Like every second you can see their health, the entire raid's health bar moves. I don't think that exists now, does it, Growl? Like, I feel like there's no such thing as rot damage in Narrowbar Palace.
I mean, it's rot damage, but it's half of everybody's health every tick.
Okay.
Like, I think, I mean, I don't expect you to pull it up now, but I remember, like, watching the Race to World First prog, that, like, intermission from
Which one?
Phase 1 and
Kaveza?
Phase 2. No, the last boss, Queen Ansarek. The intermission between Phase 1 and Phase 2 where you get, like, pulled in or whatever, just the raw amount of damage that was going out to the party. Yeah, this right here. Like, watching the health bars, and then just keep in mind, like, Evokers are just insane at this point, right? Like, they are blasting. And, like, every single AoE...
2.5 million HPS here, by the way.
Yeah, and it's just, like, I don't know. It's just absolutely crazy. Like, it's just crazy how... It's just... I don't know. Like, again, a part of me just... feels old, I guess. I don't know, like maybe this is just what everyone wants. Like all the young whippersnappers nowadays, they just need, we're just bad and everyone needs to have 7 defensives and you always press everything. And but to me, I guess I like the more methodical pace. Like, look, I'm not trying to go back to classic WoW where you have only ice block and you only press frostbolt and you just stand there. But like, I feel like at some point you kind of cross the line between like, okay, this is too much.
I love when there's a question of, did I get lay on hands? Did I press a health pot, or did I get one wog from my prot paladin? That's always the most interesting thing too, because it's like one wog can crit you for like over half your health bar right now too.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question. On previous expansions, did a health pot in the first tier is it equivalent to a lay on hands every tier?
Yeah, more often than not for the first.
I feel like this health pot was particularly strong. Health pots are usually good, but I would say this health pot was particularly strong.
That's what I felt like. I don't remember it doing like 90% of your health pool. I remember it being like 50 in the first tier.
I think the Legion one was like I think the Legion one was like 75% of your health. And I think the Dragonflight Season 1 one was also like 75 to 80% of your health. What is this one? Is this one like actually 100%?
This one's like 5.5 million or something at rank 2.
So this one's also about 80% of your health. I feel like that's normal for the first tier. It's also part of it too is that they extended the gearing, the gearing. So whenever you were doing a lot of prog, you were like 615, 620, 625, and so it was your entire health bar too.
That's fair. But yeah, it's just, I mean, this is what people are talking about, and it's been an ongoing conversation since, what is it, Dragonflight. But you look at it like over time, things have just gone faster and faster. And what are we doing about Blizzard? I don't think people want to get one shot anymore. I bet Tettle's left going bear form every time on Razagath he got the bomb.
That was the first tier of the expansion. That whenever that started happening, the first tier of the expansion, you know that you're like deep shit for the rest of the expansion. You're like, I'm getting one shot in raid, and it's just like, oh, wait a sec. One shots in raid are crazy, by the way.
I mean, I don't mind one shots given the right circumstance. They have to be like a raid wiping mechanic. Or a very obvious mechanic.
I disagree. Like, I actually hate one shots in raid. I think that one shots in Mythic Plus are tolerable to an extent. I actually hate them in raid because the dynamic of how they feel in raid is so much different because not every defensive is made equal. And so if you add in one shots, some specializations that get one shot, like are way more vulnerable to that than others, say, because there's no defensive parity at all. And so I think that for me, the best damage profile for raid is always going to be like rot or like pretty big heal checks, and not like 100-0 try to kill you in one fatal swoop, because that feels just super bad. I actually I like the raid coordination piece with like raid externals and stuff like that, and less personals. Oh, here is your pre-assigned health pot. Like I liked it whenever you would actually have those things and you would use your own discretion as opposed to it being pre-assigned.
For one shot, I'm talking about like standing at a Kybeza portal, or like a Nubaresh hits the wall. Like those one shots should be one shots.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. I got one shot by the bomb on Raz, and I got one shot by the bomb on Neltharion, and I got one shot by the bomb on Sarkareth.
Yeah, those are not good, but I think there is a place for them.
Well, obviously, there's going to have to be some stuff that kills you if you mess it up, right? But yeah. I mean, I guess when I think of a one shot, I think of something that's unavoidable. You know, like you are just, you know, expected to live it, and if you don't press something, you die. And like, I just feel like it can be used, but it should be used selectively. You know, like it should be like you know, oh, you know, 2 people in the raid get chosen and they get this really nasty thing and they have to press something, and then, you know, that's when you're expected to press something. Or one thing that I really liked is it Shade of Xavius and Darkheart Thicket, where it was like it goes to 50% and it's like, you know, it's coming, like here it is, it's the one time in the fight where it blasts everybody, and like this is where you press your big thing, you know, and it's like you're taking damage, but you know you need to save it for that one thing. Whereas if you look at a boss like, again, the PvP boss in Theater of Pain, it's just like, oh, every 30 seconds, roar, and it just hits everybody for a bunch. And that's kind of a high keyer problem, so I hate to use that as an example. But, you know, just something like that where it's like, if you don't press a defensive, like, you're literally just going to die.
I mean, realistically, the Xavius thing could be like, at 50% deals exactly 100% of your health. And you must save a defensive for it or something like that. Like that could be an interesting mechanic where it teaches you how to use your defensive.
Yeah, and it's like, exactly. That'd be weird if it was 100% of your health.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So
okay.
So
you use more a reasonable number, like 110% of your damage.
So I see 100% of what you're saying. You're saying one shots that are built for lower keys that teaches people to use defense.
Yes, it's relative to your HP percentage, not like relative to like something like a DK is not going to be completely immune to something that a mage dies to, for example.
Yeah, I mean, if they do want to keep up with this, you know, everything does crazy amounts of damage, then they definitely need to start, you know, showing people that in lower keys. Like, okay, this is the big moment, press your button, and then people press it, and then they sort of learn as you go up, more and more things will kill you or whatever.
I would like that. I feel like that would also be more scalable for mechanics and for keys and for everything. I feel like if they could actually implement that, that would be sick. What have you guys thought about the stamina gain coming into War Within? I feel like that was almost required at this point.
That's how it's felt every single time, was in the, like, people realize that Blizzard realizes, and I guess people playing beta or whatever realize that the scaling is a little bit off, and so like they do a big change, and then the game actually goes live, and it's just like, wow, what would the game have been like if they didn't do that? Because they did it during Dragonflight, they did it now, and I feel like, I mean, I really feel like they should just like double everybody's health and then like figure it out from
even
there,
right now.
Because I think the problem is just like, you just top people too quickly, you know. And I know what people are thinking, like, oh, the damage is crazy, you need to be able to. But like, my point is like, keep the damage and healing the same, but just make the HP pools bigger to just allow for more time, you know. Make it more about like, okay, every single time the big dark orb comes out in Dawnbreaker, you do need to have a cooldown to keep up, but it's not like if you need to have that cooldown pre-pressed and you need to have AMZ and you needed to sequence every single button perfectly. You know, it's more like you need to plan for it or adjust to it, but it's not so punishing when you know, make a little slip up.
The alternative is that healers could do 75% of the HPS that they could right now, but then the mobs could also hit for 75% of what they're hitting for.
That's just going in the other direction.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, raise maximum HP or lower healing and incoming damage.
Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna hit really big numbers by the end of this expansion, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like 25 million maybe in some of these.
Girl, I assume you'd rather like as a healer healing, rot damage plus, like small bursts of damage rather than almost no rot damage and just ping pong health bars.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think ping pong health bars aren't bad if it's more methodical. Like if it's more like, okay, everybody takes 90% of their health and you have to figure out how to get everybody topped over the course of 15 seconds and then it happens again versus like, you need to have a defensive and a crazy burst of healing in this 3-second window or whatever.
Disc is actually bananas because the difference, and Grau can attest to this, the difference if you actually hit your Radiance ramp perfectly versus being plus or minus 1 second off is the craziest shit ever, especially on a couple of these bosses. First boss of Arakara, first boss of Stone Vault. Like, if you hit your ramp perfectly, nobody even has to press a defensive. Like, second boss of Dawnbreaker, it is like one of these situations where Disc has enough healing power to actually just like top you through it. But if you're just like if you're like a couple of seconds off, your entire group is dead. And that to me is one of the craziest things I've ever played with, is that specialization and how it heals people.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, and now that more people are playing with Disc, because when I was pushing keys, that was something that I would say, and I feel like people probably thought I was being a little bit hyperbolic, but at times there would be a situation where like either A, everyone on my team would panic and then use a health potion, or B, like someone would die, right? And then my answer would be, well, sorry, I messed one button up.
Yeah, I pressed my mind blast too early.
I pressed one button wrong.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's the consequence. Like, and again, it's a little bit of a high keyer problem, but I think it does bleed down into lower keys as well. Talking about 10s and 12s or whatever. Of like, I do think the difficulty of healing and the precision required is high. And to answer the question about damage profiles too, I think it's hard because every healer is kind of good at different things, right? Like, just like you mentioned, Disc is really good at that precision burst ramp healing. So honestly, I had a lot of fun healing this season, even though the damage is pretty spiky like that. Disc is good at that, and Disc is fun, and that's what I was doing, right? Whereas if you play a Resto Druid, you're not, Resto Druid, you really love those fights like Kajin from Halls of Infusion last expansion, where it's like you're constantly cycling through everything, and you're maintaining everything, and you're managing your mana. Like, it does sort of depend on the type of healer that's, meta or good or whatever. But generally speaking, I think that I want things to be forgiving, and I don't want to any sort of healing profile where if I either like, okay, if you're constantly behind and like not reacting and not planning, that's one thing, but like, I don't want a healing profile where if I make a small mistake or small lapse of judgment, my party just dies very quickly, or like feels the need to expend massive defensives. Like, I want something a little bit more slower pace, a little bit more. I mean, it's just tough because healers are like so all over the place right now. Like, for instance, Disc Priest, mana just doesn't even, like, mana is not even a thing on Disc Priest.
Yeah.
Like, traditionally, what a healer is like, you can push your team's health bars up as fast or as slow as you want, but that depends on how much mana you expend, and you're thinking about, like, what spells do I use, and you're trying to be efficient. But, like, that is not what Disc Priest is at all. Like, Disc Priest has no concept of mana. It's literally all, you're playing DDR, and it's just like Radiance, this, Penance, Mind Blast, and you're like sequencing all your buttons perfect. It has nothing to do with, like, I don't want to say not decision making, but it's just totally different. It's like the healers are, it's a little bit wild. I don't know.
I pressed so many dog shit health pots this season too. Like, an unprecedented amount of just really, really bad health potions, because it's so difficult to predict how much healing you're about to get. Like, it is literally impossible.
Like, you're like doing a boss, and then you lose 80% of your health, and then like,
oh my God.
you're dead to the next tick, and then as your fingers are going to the health potion, you just watch a 3 million heal come in, and then you health pot for 10% of your health, and it's just like, bro, but what were you supposed to do?
Yeah,
like, how is this even good? You
get hit to 40%, and you just see it, and you're like, holy shit, I'm dead. You instantly health pot, and you're like, wait, I was fine. I just didn't know I was fine.
You mentioned mana, Growl. How do you? What is your take on Mythic Plus mana and Mythic Plus?
Mythic Plus mana. Oh
man, that's a hard one. So here's the thing:
as a healer, talked about this in a while.
As a healer, managing your mana is fun and interesting, and probably the most healer thing there is. Also, it's something that you can pride yourself a lot in as a good healer, being able to allow your team to go fast. Mana is not fun whatsoever for anybody else in your group.
Yes.
None of your DPS or tanks ever want you to have mana or care about mana or drink or anything. And a funny equivalent, because I've been playing a little bit of Classic, is imagine the roles are reversed and your mage had mana. Imagine if you had to wait for your mage to drink before you go into a pull, and your mage had to manage your mana from pull to pull. Like, it's just so weird, right? Like,
I mean, we have conduits to that on retail. First off, Prop Paladin uses mana right now, which is dumb.
well, dude, this season Prop Paladin's drinking.
There's another. I mean, Prop Paladin drinking is absolutely asinine. It drinks way more than your healer ever does. Your Prop Paladin is basically drinking as much as a healer normally would in a normal season. But there's another spec that's like that too. Assassination Rogue, for literally as long as they've been in the game, complain nonstop if they don't get a re-stealth in between pulls because they need like their garrotes and stuff like that. They want like the need. But like, you see, that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like the same thing with mana. They're going to tell you that they need a re-stealth the same way your healer's going to tell you that they need mana, and you're just like, well, I want a chain. I don't want you to have mana. I don't want you to re-stealth. I want a chain.
Yeah, I think my current belief with the way that mana should work in ideal world is mana is a very important resource that you need to think about and that every healer needs to manage, and it's a big part of healer gameplay. But as soon as combat drops, your mana should regenerate extremely quickly to the point where you're never drinking.
Ooh.
Like, while you're in combat, you need to be thinking about your mana. When you're in a boss fight, you need to think about mana. But as soon as the pull ends, if you live the pull, okay, great, you're back to full mana, your team can move on. Because I think waiting around drinking is just dog shit gameplay.
The issue isn't managing the mana. The issue is the drinking. And that is like all like the biggest issue is that the rest of your group is like sitting there waiting for you for like 10 seconds. And you're just like,
okay. You remember when they removed the Dark Moon Fish Feast?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you remember what they did to mana? I bet you most people don't remember what they did to mana.
They made it
remove the fish feast.
They made it scaling so that the start of your drink, you drink a lot less, and then as you drink longer. Yeah, I'm a healer. I still know these things.
Dude, that still exists. It's so dog shit.
Yep.
Oh, you don't know about the Belladar's bounty double drinking, Hershey?
No, I actually. No, why would I know that?
So Belladar's bounty. Oh, this is a good tip. You can write a Wildhead post on it, and you can thank me later. So Belladar's bounty, it's like the food from this expansion, and if you combine that with mage food, so Belladar's bounty doesn't have a mana component attached to it at all. So I think this is a bug, and you can double drink with the Belladar's bounty and the mage food at the exact same time, and double dip on the mana, and it just like tops you in like 5 seconds.
I mean, I think they just need to revert that stupid mana change from way back. I don't know why they decided at the time to make mana more difficult and take longer for healers to get between pulls.
That was the only. I think that was the only feast that even worked like that. Was the fish feast, which was why everybody was using it, right?
No, well, at the time, mage food. So basically, the amount of mana you would get from any food was linear.
Yeah,
you would get the same amount of mana the first tick as the last tick.
Okay.
When they made the fish feast change, they made the first tick give you a lot less mana, and the last tick give you a lot more mana. So the longer you sat, the more you got per second, which was the weirdest change. People complained about it for a really long time, and it still exists in the game to this day.
I do remember the fish feast also gave you instant health every single time you clicked it. That was sick.
It was 10%, yeah.
Yeah.
It was 10% health and mana.
So Bursty would come out and you like spam click the fish feast.
I swear, somebody did not like healers instantly getting mana and really punished people for using it. But
I felt like it was a PvP change.
The drinking thing? I think that is a PvP
change.
I
would actually believe that, actually, thinking about it.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure. Like, I think PvEers and PvPers blame each other for changes in the game that are completely irrelevant. But to me, it felt like, because it feels like dog shit in PvP when like someone breaks combat and then goes around a corner and they get like 2 ticks, but it just heals them or gives them a shit ton of mana and like negates everything that you did. I think it was a PvP thing, but I don't know.
Okay. Talk about key depletion.
Oh yeah, I've been hearing a lot about that again too. That comes up once a season or twice a season or 10 times.
I saw it in a Bellular video, kind of discussing key depletion a lot. Where did you see it?
Generally just from like comments and chats and people. You can feel the energy of like people talking about it. I want to say, did Quasi make a video? He maybe brought it up or talked or something about it. Yoda made a video recently talking about some sort of suggestion to try and like reduce the homework keys even more.
Okay. Yeah, so it's been discussed by a few different sources at this point. And so I think that it's kind of interesting to talk about because I think that there are pros and cons to key depletion that people don't necessarily talk about all the time, and we can kind of talk about, is key depletion good, is it bad? Because I think it's kind of similar to the gearing thing, where of course people are always going to complain about anything that gives them friction because they just see friction as innately negative. But first and foremost, I'm just going to lay this out. We can talk about the pros and cons, and we can talk about like, is key depletion good or bad? Does it actually serve the purpose that it's trying to serve from Blizzard's perspective? So the pros, there's no reliance on practicing a first pull of a dungeon. There would be this weird situation, particularly for high keys, but even at lower keys, where you're expected to overpull the very beginning of a dungeon because there's basically no consequences for depleting a key. And so there would be some expectation of having practice on like a TGP level first pull of a dungeon, which is, you know, a bit inappropriate for most people and how they actually want to play the system. It also extends the system and creates replayability. It ends up like delaying how long you can actually push up to your max level key because there is a punishment for depleting. So by virtue of that, it ends up extending the system. There's also collateral for leaving and disbanding a group, meaning that there's going to be a punishment. It kind of creates this incentive for you to see a run through to the end if it's going to be close, as opposed to just like bailing in the middle of it. There's also, in theory, fewer depletes and it more accurately ensures that you have a key around your skill level. There's an argument that this doesn't necessarily work in practice, but in theory, this should be a pro for the system, that it should more accurately ensure that you have a key that is more representative of your skill level. Obviously, the cons are that you're doubly punished for a deplete. Not only does your key not go up, but it goes down another level below that at which you were trying to complete, which is a huge time waste. I think that that's the biggest complaint of the system by far. So I think that that's obviously the biggest con, is that you are getting doubly punished whenever you deplete a key. You're also held hostage by 4 other players if you are that keystone holder, where if one person decides that the key's not in time, or they want to be a bad actor or whatever else like that, basically your key is depleted, and then you're again like wasting so much time because you have been unfortunately held hostage by 4 other players. It's also difficult for any group formed via LFG to want to stay together if you wiped to like the first pull of the dungeon. And this happens. It happens to literally everybody. There's no incentive. Like, and if there was no depletes, you would actually just be like, all right, we go again, replug the key in. Maybe one person leaves. Not a big deal. We just refill that slot. But it would be very difficult for any group that's formed via LFG to want to stay together if you did, say, wipe to the first pull of the dungeon, where basically nobody has anything like invested that's overly high. Okay, where do we want to start? Would you guys agree with those being the pros and the cons of the system?
I actually think there's one major pro to the system that almost nobody acknowledges, and basically keys are the way that the system allows for you to get your foot in the door to move up in ranks easier. So the thing is, let's say you're in a key. Who's the most dog shit player likely to be? It's either going to be the tank, because you can't find a tank and you take whoever applies, or it's going to be whoever's key it was who somehow made this group, right? Some guy who got lucky in 2 chests and a miss, and now he's terrorizing Group Finder with a 14 Grimbit's hole, right? And so having this key system allows you to bring something of value to 4 other players and have them play with you. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. People complain about the gatekeeping and all this and LFG, and they think that somehow removing depletes or like allowing you to pick your keystone will make it better, but it will make it so much worse, because there's no reason to ever play anything that's not the meta comp, right? Because you literally, if you're some guy who's a feral druid and you can't get invited, normally if you get a good key or you push your key up, you can find people who will want to play with you even if you're not a meta class, because they want your key. But if you don't have anything to bring now, it's literally going to be Enhancement Shaman, DK, Aug Evoker, whatever tank and whatever healer in every single group, because why would they invite you? You're one of your only ins to be able to create groups and build score is the fact that you brought that keystone. And so when you create a tournament realm scenario where you get to pick whatever key you want, look, if you have 4 other friends to play with and you're being annoyed by the reroll system, you might benefit by that. But if you're some guy who's out there pugging, man, like, you think it's hard to find groups now, good luck. If you don't, like, if you can't bring a keystone or you can't re-roll into something good.
I'd probably agree with that. Like, right now it's a key. If you have the key holder, you have the power.
Yeah.
If we were to remove key depletion, then once you have a key, then you can make it. Then realistically, there's going to be a lot of groups out there. like a lot of groups. Some of which are going to be, as Grau said, people who +2 to an 8 miss and probably don't want to be there or are not ready to be in a +10. And it's going to be really, really hard to find that. So I think like having the power be in the hands of the key holder does kind of make sense. But like the system as it currently stands with key depletion isn't necessarily without its issues.
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, I think there's like some level of like two-factor authentication because your score never actually goes down. People kind of look at IO score as like the universal, like this is this player's skill, and that's partially true, but it's not like the whole truth because your IO never goes down. And say, like you said, you get lucky and you +2 a mist and it turns into an Arakara 10, and then next thing you know, you list that key and you get that 10. And you're not necessarily ready for 10s, but you have a 10 on your sheet. Like, there's a question as to whether or not, like, you're actually that skill level. And so
you're almost saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that's a good thing that you can do that. Like, it lets people move up.
I think it's. Well, then you would actually be like. I think it's a little bit both, right? I think it is a little bit of both good and bad thing. I think that for some of those people, like, I actually like that people can skip key levels that way. But I do think that like some other people, they're going to view that as a negative thing because then they have some jabroni in their group that shouldn't be in a 10.
Yeah, their key gets downgraded. If they have a key that does not reflect their skill level, they'll just get downgraded after the
exactly, and that's why it would be a pro, right? But like,
yeah.
I think I mean, to me, I think it's a pure plus. Like, I think. If that's your mindset that, it lets dog shit players into my keys, I mean, I don't know, like, generally speaking, a huge problem that I would say people have a bigger problem of getting into groups and having groups rather than, I have so many groups and all these players are dog shit. Like, some people say that, but
that guy got banned. That guy got banned.
Yeah, that guy got banned. Yeah. So, like, I don't know. I think that, I just think that people don't understand the impact that it would have on the system. And if you're just some random DPS who's like pugging keys, I mean, you're just never gonna get invited ever. Like you bring nothing now. Like if you're some middle of the road DPS player, like there's never any reason to, why would when they can so easily find more DPS because there's so few tanks. Like if it's a tank dominated world now, I can't imagine what it would be like if tanks could just choose whatever key they wanted to go into every single time.
I do
like,
think
what would be the point of anybody ever listing a group if you're not a tank?
True.
You're not making a group without a tank, and the tank
That's
can just
true.
make whatever key he wants and pick whatever players he wants now. So why would he even bother joining a group?
I think to me the biggest issue of the system that we currently face right now, and I do think that there needs to be some punishment necessarily for failing a key, but I think the biggest issue is the level of punishment that you face whenever you actually deplete a key, because it's not even that it just doesn't go up, but it's that it actually goes down a key level, and a 9 is so much less valuable than a 10. Like you're never doing a 9 for a weekly. It's just not a thing. You basically, if your key ever ends up depleting out of that 10 range, for a lot of people that key is just dead until next week.
Yeah.
And I think that is like the biggest issue with the system, and I think that that's the biggest point of friction that people are facing right now with it.
I mean, I think part of it, like, if you go to the fundamentals, what is the actual issue that people have with key depletion? It's people feel like it's punishing, right? Like you said, it is if they put in their key and they feel like somebody else ruins it for them due to wipes or whatever, or tank dies or what, and somebody leaves. Their key is now bricked.
You're wasting my time, right? Like you're wasting my time for a long term.
That's probably the most common one that I hear, like, against key depletion, and probably one of the only ones. Is there what other fundamental problems do people have like with key depletion itself other than that?
I mean, I think it depends across the board. Like it depends on, like, everyone sort of has different problems depending on the way they interact. Like what Tuttle's mentioned, if you're just trying to do your weekly 10, you're just trying to get your loot, get the heck out, right? If you have a 10 and you feel like you're capable of timing every 10 and you just don't really like pushing keys and you don't feel like doing 11s, as soon as you have like something unlucky happen and you get a 9, now you're wasting massive amounts of time relative to what you normally do, right? I think that's a problem. If you're somebody who well, problem is a tough word, but it's an obstacle.
It's
If
annoying.
you're, yeah, if you're someone like Yoda who's pushing high keys with a coordinated group, and you need an 18 Dawnbreaker, but as soon as you have a 17 Dawnbreaker, now it's literally just you have to do this, and it's a chore, and you have to complete this key and time it and play well just to get a chance to do something that you want. That's an obstacle. I think that if you're somebody in LFG who's just is trying to move up the ranks and you're putting your key in and you get a Grimbatol and then you deplete it and now you have a hard key that's a low level, that's an obstacle. The problem is like people are kind of wanting to just stick it in the hole here, like they're not really thinking about like just removing the obstacle. I don't really think necessarily makes the system better. You know, like just making it so keys don't deplete is like, well, I don't know.
It's weird because I actually think the system is good for keys that are 11 and up. And I don't necessarily think it's great for keys that are below a 10. I think that there's this weird pressure that gets put onto players where they get like a lot of anxiety over the concept of like depleting a key, especially from that like 2 to 9, 2 to 10 range, where they get just really bad anxiety over the possibility of depleting a key. And whenever you actually start doing this, using the system from that 11 up, whenever you're actually like pushing keys, for example, I feel like it is a much better system at that point. And I think that it's one of those things that I do kind of wonder if it would be better if keys didn't deplete sub 10.
I think that could be better. Although what I will say is I think in general, the people that have anxiety, as someone who has anxiety about some things, will generally just have anxiety about anything, no matter what. Like if there's somebody who's like, oh, I'm scared of ruining people's key. Now they're, oh, I'm scared of wasting people's time, or, oh, I'm scared of making a mistake and them not liking me. Like, I don't really think someone who has anxiety about depleting someone else's key as soon as you remove key depletion is like, I'm free. Like, no, I'm totally fine with this group. Like in general, I don't really think it fixes that problem. Yeah, I guess I don't, to me, on one hand, I sort of agree that like removing key depletion from lower keys is helpful and like it doesn't really serve a purpose, especially for people that don't really enjoy the whole idea of Mythic Plus and they're mainly just there to get their loot. And it's like they're not trying to do this on a timer and push their limits and get IO score. They're just trying to do what they need to do to raid or whatever. And I think to some extent that's reasonable. On the other hand, like that's the most value when I talk about bringing a key and getting a group. Like you can push up a key to like 10s or whatever and be so unbelievably undergeared or underqualified, but because you pushed up your key, like you can get your foot in the door and do what you need to do if you're a skilled enough player. And yeah, so I don't know. Like
I don't think that would remove this from the system though, right? Because like the 10s would still deplete into 9s, but the 9s wouldn't ever be able to deplete into like 8s or whatever.
To me, I think the biggest problem when it comes to the pug system and depletes is the imbalance of punishment. Like, you know, you have one person who loses their key and then everyone else doesn't give a fuck and they just lose the group.
Yeah.
And I think that I could see a world where maybe they do some sort of a rework where it's like everybody in the group puts in something and then like everybody loses something, you know what I mean? So everybody is incentivized to like, you know, like people have talked about this idea of like, oh, you have 3 tries at a key or whatever. Like, I don't know, maybe like everybody in the group needs to have an 11 key and then, you know, after 3 depletes of your 11 key, it goes down to a 10 and then like you can do whatever. I don't know. I don't really have anything cooked up for that, but you sort of get the idea, right? Of like having symmetrical punishment across the group for pugs. I don't think it matters too much when you have a static team, but let's be honest, like most people interact with the system through pugs, and like having something where everybody is forced to have a little bit of a stake and then everybody loses something if the key goes south, I think is more fair and like better off. But I don't know how that would impact the system, I guess.
For me, like I think key depletion is better than no key depletion, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a better form with key depletion that exists.
Yeah.
And like I mean the major issues I think that people have stated with key depletion is it feels bad at specific breakpoints. It's mostly 10.
9 to 10. 9 to 10 is a terrible.
10 to 9, big one. But I also would agree that like 7 to 6 is a big one for people who don't get up there. Because 7 is the start of Hero Track, end of dungeon, and also Gildeds. Wait, no, 8s. It's 8s, isn't it?
Either way, the point stands, right? Wherever you're farming Gildeds.
Yes, 8s to 7s or 7s to 6s, wherever that may be. Like, there's various breakpoints there. And I'm wondering if, like, You know how it's like in league ranking systems or like other ranking systems, you get like a demotion game. Like if you lose this game, you're out.
Yeah.
I think they could almost do that for keys in a way. Like I know people suggest like the 2 to 3 charges, like Grau said, but I don't even think it needs to be on every key level. Like 2 tries at a 9, I don't think you'll be that hard pressed if you go down to an 8. But 10 to a 9 is such a big one that I feel like there should be more leniency there.
It's kind of weird because IO never goes down, but the keys do, right?
I mean, that was the other thing that I was thinking about, right? Like, what if you had a fluctuating IO?
Holy shit.
Like an actual, like an actual
you were in the kitchen. You were in the kitchen. You were kind of cooking something up. I smelled the garlic and the onions, and I was excited. But then I was like, "Oh, what's that? Some something."
Bro,
every time you fail a key, your IO just goes down, Grau. Sorry to say.
Dude, then I'm not allowed to play with like I can only play like super sweat keys, and I'm not able to like play with my friends anymore who are maybe slightly
It was a horrible
worse.
idea, but I wanted to say it anyways.
Shit.
The funny thing is, I've heard that before, mostly in the solo key department.
Fluctuating IO would be crazy.
No, but like I do think charges is like the best solution that I've heard. I think it makes key depletion more palatable. But yeah, it's definitely a rough spot to be in.
I think the thing that I would like to fix is just like the feeling that you're wasting your time and like getting doubly punished. That to me, I feel like is like a pretty big issue, because say you're trying to time a 9 to get to a 10, you really want this 10 super bad, but then you deplete the 9, and so now you have to go time an 8, and then you have to time that 9 again, and that to me is like, so you just turned your 30-minute dungeon into another hour's progression in 2 other dungeons that may or may not be guaranteed for you to actually be able to continue to progress the system. And I think that to me is something that Blizzard probably needs to be looking at. I think that key depletion is actually really good whenever you're pushing keys. Miyoda maybe has some issues with the system just as a whole, but I think that turning the system into the tournament realm on retail is really, really bad for replayability of the system and just long-term gameplay. I really don't like that idea, because I think that it reduces the replayability by a substantial amount if your key can't deplete at all.
Yeah, I think when it comes to that sort of thing, when it comes to like a group playing together, key depletion is generally a problem strictly for like the very, very top end.
Yes.
Where like you don't even know if the certain keys are possible. But I would say key depletion for like an average group, like if you're, let's say you just start coming together and like playing for the season, I feel like it's like great, right? Like you can decide, do I want to do a homework key? Do we do this? You're bouncing around dungeons, like you get to reroll. I actually think it's in a great spot. I think so. Those are the 2 real pain points. And I'll be honest, like I love Yoda and I do high key pushing too, but like we can't really build a system around with the world first shit. So really what I think we need to look at is, can we redesign the key system or create a new key system specifically for pugs? I don't know if solo queue is a thing, but like how do we create a key system that's more pug friendly?
So charges I think is actually a pretty interesting solution, because I think it still creates this collateral, whereas there's a punishment if you actually do deplete the key. It will kind of end up keeping players and groups honest about their relative skill level beyond just looking at their IO score. I think that's a pretty good solution. Again, I could even be down for like no depletes below 9. I think that one of the things too that would actually improve on, if there's no deplete, or below 10. If there's no depletes below 10, that will actually continue to allow you to actually like learn the dungeons in a manner that I feel like is more conducive with like linear progression throughout the system, as opposed to kind of like this. It's really difficult to actually like learn the keys, I feel like, unless you're spending a ton of time or doing a bunch of beta dungeons and stuff like that. Because how Growl and I, for example, like learn these dungeons is we put in a lot of time on the PTR beforehand without key depletion, and we learn all the mechanics going into the season before the season even launches. And most people don't do that. They don't operate that way, and so they actually have to learn with that punishment already in place.
That's fair.
That kind of makes it sound a little bit unfair. I don't know if I would go
it's
that far.
It's not unfair.
That is partially true.
I mean,
it is kind of true. Yeah, I guess.
It's like super sweaty because we're like practicing, right? Effectively, like we're learning the mechanics before they come out, and so then we want the highest chance of actually knowing the mechanics, and so we can do a 10 immediately.
I hate that personally. Like, I don't want to do it.
I hate it too.
There are people that do it. I don't. it does feel like it's kind of. I mean, this is like at a top level or whatever, but it does feel like it's kind of necessary. I don't know. I think yeah.
I wish we just didn't have a PTR. Like, if these
Oh, yeah,
dungeons in the
100
raid could go
100p.
untested, I would be down. Like, that's
Yep.
way more fun.
To play devil's advocate a little, isn't what you're discussing with like key depletion having to, you go from 9 to an 8 to a 9 to a 10, not like identical to like ranking systems in other games? Are you not just describing what somebody is struggling with directly with like when they claim they're stuck in elo hell?
Well, there's always the question: does elo hell exist?
No, but like in all seriousness, is that not kind of what you're saying? Like sometimes you just have a bad game, you have bad teammates, you have, you just get stuck in a bad game, your thing depletes, you just got to climb back up. And if you're of an appropriate skill and deserve to rank up, people would claim that you will be able to climb out of it, as Growl did in his 10 series.
I think that this is the reason that people want solo queue, is because this system already feels like a solo queue to them because of exactly what you've described. And so why not just remove the LFG aspect of it and just introduce the queuing aspect into it? I mean, it kind of is, but I think the biggest criticism is that the punishment is too high relative to what the gain would otherwise be. Yeah, because you end up like, so you spent the 30 minutes to do the key just for it to deplete, and now you have to spend an hour to get back to that same point that you were at right before the key depleted.
Isn't that what you do?
I mean, I think the big difference is that everyone.
Well,
that plays,
this isn't League.
Everything comes down to just the idea that everything that you do in this game is rewards driven, and it's like people are looking at what's ahead of them and they're thinking specifically about the reward and not about the journey. And like, the idea that this reward is going to take them an extra hour or 2 hours or 10 hours is like very upsetting to people. Whereas, when you're playing League or like a game, you're sort of like, you're not really playing, you're not going to do anything with your platinum rank or whatever. I mean, maybe some people, whatever, but generally, like, people in WoW, I think, are looking at specifically like, how much work do I have to do to get what I want, and then I'm done. Like, that's sort of how people think about it. Not really as like okay, I'm gonna get better and improve and then earn.
I think you nailed it there.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. I think that's the exact counterpoint to the to that argument.
Let me say though, I do think that depending on your mindset and gaming history, I think it changes how you interact with the system. Like, I think if you have a history playing a competitive game where you've done that and you've moved up and down ranked and suffered and all that, I feel like you're a lot more adept to just beating the M+ system and making your way out and getting better. Whereas the people who are mainly like MMO players and are just trying to like do grinds to get loot, I feel like those are the people that get mostly stuck and frustrated by the system.
I was gonna say there's a lot of different reasons that people do Mythic Plus, right? Some do it for accomplishments. Some do it because they want, Keystone Masters mount. Some do it because they want the loot out of their weekly 10. Like you're saying, those people are just trying to chase the gear in the reward system. I feel like there's like so many different reasons that people do Mythic Plus. It's kind of challenging to make a one size fits all system for how depletes actually interact with the system. I will say, the moment that I'd have to start practicing dungeons or whatever to like try to like practice to time a key, that is immediately where the system becomes unfun for me.
I mean, I think there's an argument to be made, like, it's why does, like, when you wipe on a boss in Mythic Raid or Heroic Raid, or you fail the Delve boss, you don't get reset and have to you don't have to go back and go down a level and do it again. You just get to go again.
Yeah.
So like, I think that's a pretty fair argument. I just don't know how it applies to Mythic Plus. Like, yes, the cynic part would be, oh, you just get to try 10s and an infinite number of times. But is that better? I mean,
it's crazy to think about when you compare that, because in Raid, not only do you get to do it over and over again, but also the it's so much more bite sized compared to M plus, right? Like you're doing a boss for 6 minutes or 7 minutes where you need to do everything well. Whereas an M plus dungeon is potentially 35 minutes or 40 minutes long. So not only is the raid boss, you're only doing it for 5 minutes, but then you're also just able to retry it over and over again. Whereas M plus, like you need to play consistently well and not make mistakes or have your team play well for over 30 minutes. And if you deplete it, you don't even get to try it again. You have to start over, which I don't know. Like on one hand, if you think about it, it sounds wrong or backwards. But on the other hand, like maybe it makes more sense then why the system would be unfun if you could try it over and over again. Like it's not really that crazy to retry a 5-minute boss over and over again, but to retry a 30-minute dungeon is like way too grueling and it'll burn you out.
I think part of
sort of have to protect us from ourselves there.
Part of it too is that you don't necessarily know approximately what skill level you're supposed to be at. It's kind of interesting because like LFR is like queued content. It's largely trivial. Nobody in LFR needs to know what's going on. Normal, it's not like super easy, but it's not the hardest thing ever. Like you only need to have like a couple of people in there who actually kind of know what's going on to be able to kind of get through it. More often than not, you just kind of need people to press their buttons. Heroic, you need a few more people to know what's going on. And then Mythic is like a big step up from Heroic, where it's a 20-person preset group. Everybody kind of needs to know what's going on, and everybody kind of has to be doing their job. And the Mythic Plus system, it exists in between LFR players and those Mythic level raiders, and it's like the same system is for all of those players. And I think that like for Mythic raiding, that Mythic raiding won't be for you sometimes. But you won't know that plus 12 isn't actually for you until you actually start trying it. And it's kind of a weird thing because, I've done all my 11s. Now 12s, are they for me? Who knows? It should be. It's plus 1 more.
M plus is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, like thinking about it in my head, the only way a no deplete system in my head would work, that Blizzard would even have a chance of going for it, would be something like every week your key level gets reset. And everybody needs the same key level to be put in at the same time, or lower, or higher. I think that's the only way that Blizzard would have a chance of going for it.
No depletes for your key resets.
Because that would make it about equivalent to what would happen in Raid. Is that every week you get reset, you work your way back up, and everybody in the group needs a key level equal to or higher than the level that you're trying to do it.
Just gut reaction. That is a pain in the ass if you actually are pushing keys with with your friends. Like say your friends are pushing keys. In this system that you're describing, you are heavily incentivized to push your own key only ever. Because
no, it's crap. To be fair, say it was
like everybody's key goes up.
Everybody's key goes up.
Like we all put in 6s. Grau puts in a 7. His stays at a 7, but we all go up to a 7 or 8 if we tube chest it.
Okay, but then how do you get a new dungeon? And like
on the roll. Like that's the only way I see Blizzard doing it. And keeping the system faithful to what it is these days. I don't think they would go for it, but like in the nature of cooking, like that's
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
I don't think it's a great idea. I think the system is better than what that is, because I don't think anybody wants to push up every week.
The problem too is like if your reroll there is actually completing a depleted dungeon, and nothing is less satisfying than doing a Grim Batol 18 that you're never timing just to have it to turn into like potentially a Dawnbreaker 18.
Oh yeah.
That is a terrible system.
Need to remind you that back in the day, the Great Vault used to give one key level lower than your top. So you didn't do a 10, you didn't do a 20 back then. You did a 21 to make sure that your key was the correct level, so you didn't need to do extra keys the next week.
Well, that was if you timed it, it was the same level. If you depleted it, was level below, right?
Was that what it was?
I think that's what it was, yeah.
I think that's what it is now, not what it was.
Oh, maybe you're right.
I thought it was always gives one level lower.
Actually, I think you are right.
It was always
one lower because they wanted you to climb every week.
That's right.
Which is basically the system that, like, they, in my mind, based on what they are doing, with the fact that they haven't touched depletion, and they originally had key depletion in the Great Vault every week and kind of reset you, they want to make sure that people are at an appropriate skill level. They want to make sure that people formerly used to work their way back up to where they were. That shows a clear indication of what they're trying to do here. Are they right in doing that? I don't know. But that's just where that's just like based on their actions what I see.
Any final thoughts on Depletes?
I think we've basically solved nothing. We've just identified a bunch of problems. I think the big thing though is one thing I want to say, and this is maybe a little bit of a correction of what I said previously. Not a correction, but just a maybe expansion, is that I've talked about that I think that having keys be like this is very, very good because it encourages people to come together and make groups and, play with your friends or whatever. And that's like the most fun way to enjoy the game. However,
most people don't play like that.
Mythic Plus is just so fun. Like, even if you don't have a group and you're just like whatever, some solo guy, Mythic Plus is probably the most fun way to experience the game with a lot of different characters. And like, I don't know, I do think that Blizzard does need to put more effort into the pug scene and trying to make the pug scene more fun. So I didn't mean to dismiss it and say like, who cares about pugs, just find a group or whatever, because I mean, pugging Mythic Plus, as miserable it is, it's still really, really freaking fun. And I do think maybe them trying to go back to the drawing board and think about how to build a system that is better for pugging is it should be on their priority list. Like, I think I would like to see them cook up some experiments during some of these 0.7 patches and downtimes or season 4 to try and cook up something to have a better, improved new pug system for whatever the next WoW expansion is. So yeah, I think, I don't mean to say that pugging, nobody cares, but
I mean, the biggest thing in that regard, just to kind of get into that topic a little, is the number of groups just going is just low. They had the tank changes at the start of this expansion, heavily not regarded well. And, who are you generally waiting on in a pug? The tank or the healer. 2 roles of which just are not fun to play and have extra responsibilities. So I don't even think the LFG system needs to get a massive overhaul. If you solve the fundamental problem, that is more groups going, you will have more people playing, and more successful groups. You'll also have more unsuccessful groups. But if the queue times are down, you spend less time waiting, you're more time in a queue, you're going to get more successes. That's just by, numbers. And I really, really, really encourage Blizzard to look at what tanking is right now, because it's not fun. As a former career tank, tanking is not fun.
Yeah, I think what part of the reason why I'm dismissive or argumentative about changes like solo queue or key depletion is because I think by far like the biggest problem and way they can improve the game is trying to make tanking more appealing and getting more people to play tank. Like if there is an equal number of tank and deep, or not equal, but relatively the correct ratio between tanks and DPS players, like there's going to be way more groups, right? Because like, you don't get to play if you don't play with the off meta DPS because there's so many tanks. I feel like improving the game, I mean, this is obviously a topic for another episode, but improving the game for tanks is, I think, the number one priority for them. And it's hard. It's not easy. I don't have a great solution there either, but
I think the final thought for me on this key depletion thing is I feel like players just want their time to feel like it's respected. And I think that it's difficult to sort this out in like a one-size-fits-all solution. I do think that people just talk about removing key depletion as this universal solve, and I actually don't think it's that. I actually think that there are some pros mixed in with the cons. I do tend to agree, though, that especially some people aren't having their time respected, especially with how the current key depletion system works, and Blizzard should be looking on how they can possibly change that in the future.
Yeah, that plus queue times. I mean, queue times is a big
queue times, yeah. It would maybe be less of an issue if you're key depleted, if you were actually able to get into another group pretty quickly. If you end up waiting
minutes to just have your key depleted,
logging out,
that's not a good feeling.
You're logging out. Yeah, we waited 30 minutes to get our key depleted in the first 15 minutes of a dungeon. We've spent 45 minutes just to now have another hour of a grind ahead of us plus queue times. Log off. We're out of here.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. Cool stuff I've seen this week. First and foremost, what I have is there's a Break the Meta. So what this is, I actually kind of have an interesting question for you guys. Would this be cool for the TGP? How this is pitched is Break the Meta is an event that RIO typically puts on where they have identified some specializations that are below a certain play rate threshold on their particular role. they'll typically pick like, you know, 2 tanks as part of the meta and 2 healers as part of the meta, and then they'll and a few DPS as part of the meta, and then they will make eligible specializations for a break the meta event where you are able to get rewards, and the rewards vary between, you know, shop mounts and merch and whatever else. 60 days of World of Warcraft game time, RIO shirt, Furline pet, stuff like that. How do you guys think this would work for a TGP? I'm kind of interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Unfortunately, I think it's very hard to be creative in higher end keys, and I think that while it'll end up, I think, devolving into a very similar thing where you're just seeing every team run the same thing.
Okay.
You know, like if let's say you run a break the meta event for TGP, oh boy, and then everybody, you know, is forced to run non-meta specs, and you're running a team, and then you see Echo running a team that's different, and then you see Mandatory running the same team that Echo's running. You're like, well, I guess we're wrong, and then you just roll all the characters that they have. And I think that while in theory it would be cool if like everyone tried different stuff and experimented, I think it sort of wouldn't really have the appeal of, you know, everyone running crazy stuff. It would just be the same like mediocre comp of like almost as good but not quite as good, and like I don't know, maybe there might be a few cool events or whatever.
What if you were allowed to play like 2 meta specializations from like a list, and then you'd have to play like 3 non-meta? Would that be more interesting? Or do you think it would be a similar issue where it's like completely solved?
So the idea, Max and I and Dorky talked about this as an idea in Dragonflight. If somehow you could do an event where you have a draft and you assign each specialization a value, and then you have a certain amount of points to spend, and you sort of like basically force diversity, right? Not every team can run the same comps or whatever. I think that would be the most interesting way if you wanted a competitive format of like different teams have to run different comps, and then you can see what you can make work with your comp. But I think if you allow every team to run, you know, limiting the more you limit classes, it'll limit diversity, right? If you say, okay, you can't run any meta comps, but you run everything else, it's like, well, now you're just limiting the play space of what people can do. But if you're saying, okay, well, you have to run this comp and you have to run this comp, yeah, you're limiting it, but you're also like featuring every single spec. And I think that's what people really want to see when it comes to diversity.
For me, I think Break the Meta is really awesome as a community event, just because it allows people who don't play meta specs to kind of really shine.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of just like an amateur event, which I think is awesome. If this were to be like an actual TGP where it goes like super meta, I think it would turn into what Growl said, very, very god comps based on what is and is not allowed. But also just like it's hard because these players might also, you know, the overlap of people that I feel like are going to play or going to try to push TGP and want to put in the time to learn these off meta specs are probably not that much of an overlap. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much time is invested. Like, I think if these events were more like spontaneous, you know, it was like, okay, you get access to your account on Friday and the event's on Saturday and Sunday, and then it's done. I feel like you might see more people willing to just kind of throw their hat in the ring and try stuff. But the way a lot of these events pan out is you get tournament access, you have over a week on the tournament realm, you're basically expected to be practicing full time and doing like a crazy schedule. And yeah, the overlap of people that are willing to do that are way less, right? But if it was something where like you weren't necessarily punished for not doing that, and you could just kind of like show up on the tournament realm and be good or have a good strategy and win, I think it might appeal to more people.
You guys have anything interesting you guys saw this week?
What about you, Squishy?
Growl's been in the mines, I think.
There are lots of people that are claiming for Silken court nurse because there are something. Dude, there's this thread. If you go to like the stats on WoW progress,
dude, I saw this actually.
Dude, there are like over 1,000 guilds stuck on Mythic Silken court, which is an insane number. There
Yes,
are so many guilds stuck on
nine-
Mythic Silken Court.
959 guilds that are stuck on Silken Court.
And I've learned that people hate this boss now.
Why?
As time has gone on, these guilds do not like this boss fight.
Dude, you know what's funny? I actually had the bug show back up during Heroic this week.
Yeah, it still exists.
I killed Silken Court on Heroic, and the boss went in the last phase, and he didn't do the burrow thing to put his shield up, and he's just like standing there. He's AFK. I was like,
yeah, there's still really weird lag issues occasionally. I think that one's caused by one of them. You can still occasionally steal a line from somebody else in Kai'Veza. Like, the lag issues still persist here and there, but Mythic Silken Court is definitely punishing a lot of guilds pretty
why
heavily.
is it so? What is so hard about it? Is it just that it's like so scripted that it requires?
It's very different than every other boss fight.
Explain.
So every move is basically scripted. And people, on Reddit are like, "Oh, you need a 60-page raid plan to go through, like, and describe all these things." And I think it's a little bit. It's not technically false, but a little bit hyperbole. It's just a very different encounter than WoW. WoW usually has. How do I say this? Grau, do you have like any thoughts on it while I try to piece together my thoughts on this and how to explain it?
I would say the only thing I can think of about what makes it different, and there's a whole lot of personal responsibility, like constantly, like for instance, the debuffs. You have 5 people selected that have the debuffs every single time, and you have to deal with multiple sets of those debuffs. Like you have to get very lucky to not have those 2 idiots in your raid get a debuff at some time. And also, like, basically at any point, somebody can wipe the raid or at the very least kill themselves and another person just by making a bad movement. And I feel like it's just one of those fights that's like very, very, very heavy on single responsibility. And the people who just want to do good damage and just follow the boss around basically will just completely grief the raid. And I don't know if it's so much that it takes a lot of homework, because even going into it with no homework, like if you kind of understand what you're doing, it makes sense. But I think it's a matter of like, you can't really just turn your brain off and pull the boss over and over again and just get lucky with who gets the mechanics. Like I don't know. Okay, to be fair, after playing Silken Court a lot, definitely wasn't one of my favorite bosses, but I didn't really think it was that egregious. We fought it after the nerfs, so maybe it was a lot harder beforehand, but I didn't really think it was like that unfair or that crazy, especially the fact that, I mean, we basically just copy pasted Liquid or Echoes or whatever strategy. Like, we didn't have to come up with anything or use our brains. Like, we just had to execute. It's just very overly punishing for the people who just, like, I don't know, are monkeys, which was basically every single DPS player in the world.
I think there's some asymmetry as well. Typically on dance bosses, everybody's doing the same thing every time. And in this case, there's what essentially amounts to 4 different groups for phase 1 doing different things. You have 2 colors, and in each color you have a melee clump and a range clump. And every clump does something different throughout all of phase 1. And having to, keep track of all of that definitely, is difficult. Plus also the fact that there is some minor RNG on the encounter. But I think, as Carl said, it comes down to personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that there is a fight that has been as heavy on like specific positioning as this one. Which is funny because it requires the DPS check on this fight was non-existent, even non-existent very, very early on. It is just a pure positioning and dance fight, which is not something we get on WoW very often. Grau, do you think it gets nerfed before the holidays?
I don't know.
I don't know that.
I don't know. Maybe just because people are complaining, but I don't think it needs to.
I feel like Blizzard hasn't really cared. This might be speaking out of the line here, but I feel like Blizzard hasn't cared too much about raid this patch.
Holy. I think they did a lot, but I think a lot of the bosses have been basically nerfed into the ground on top of the stacking raid buff or whatever.
I think they released it way too hot. Like, it was way too hard on release, and like they needed to do that. But like I feel like the state that the raid is currently in is the state that the raid probably should have released in.
I think they shot each boss twice. They shot each boss once right after Race to World First, which was
Yeah.
the normie nerfs. This is to make it the non-crazy people Race to World First nerfs, which was perfect timing. I think they absolutely should have done that. And now and then they hit every boss again. I think Brood Twister is fine, minus the fact that you still want 2 grips, which I think is silly, but that's a separate issue. I don't think Kybeza got nerfed again, but I think that's totally okay because I think Kybeza is taken up specifically by the damage and healing buff. That's all that fight is.
I see groups starting to like pug Nexus Princess and Brood Twister now in Mythic.
Yeah, I mean, like the buff takes over that, and
Pug,
then
Pug is very loose here.
It's people that have done it before and are on an ult because you still need to know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. Right. These are people who've done it before on an alt who aren't raiding in their guild, but they're just like showing up on a Saturday in like a Mythic plus alt.
Yeah, and then Queen got hit really hard right before Hall of Fame closed. Queen, on the other hand, it took a slight nerf and hasn't been touched since. So I could see it happening one more time. But that's basically it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on to the Q&A. First question from Victor. He asks, would it have been better for the game, primarily for Mythic Plus, if AUG was a tank spec instead of support? This way, we would get another range DPS plus tank combo, and the playstyle of buffing and CC feels like it would suit the tank role well. I think what they did with AUG, making it a DPS, is probably the correct thing for it to do. I was a little bit worried that it was actually going to launch as a healer whenever they first announced a support style specialization. And I feel like if it launched as a healer, it would be completely... Like, you think it was broken now? If it launched as a healer, it would be completely broken or completely unusable, and there's no in between again. I think it's supposed to be a DPS. Would it have been better for the game if it was a tank? Probably not.
Bro, no tank wants to buff their team. Tanks hate their team.
Tanks are there to be your savior, bro.
Tanks are there to pull what they could live at the expense of their entire group dying. Right. How many times has that happened to you?
What?
I feel like it's happened a lot. Your tank just pulls what they know they can live, but don't figure out how much the group can live.
Yeah, as a healer, yeah, that's like a big problem talking about tank survivability or whatever. Is like, I'm not saying that I think tanks should be weak, but compared to classic WoW, where 90% of the danger is auto attack damage, you never see a tank go crazy and pull shit because they're just gonna die instantly, right? But in retail, like, there's so many situations where the danger of the pull is like some crazy nonsense that has nothing to do with the tank.
Or casters, web.
Yeah, and to be fair, like, how's the tank supposed to know, right? If he's just some random guy in a +7, like, he's not gonna know how all the mobs work. Dangerous, and I feel like it makes it annoying for tanks. So I definitely sympathize with that idea that, like, tanks just pull stuff and they have no idea or care about their group. I know it's a little off topic, but yeah, I don't know. Buff it, a tank that buffs the group. No, I like AUG. I think AUG's in a great spot for everybody who's not like pushing cutting edge content, and I think that it's a problematic spec for world first stuff. And I think that, like, for the average person who's just like doing whatever, being able to like play a support spec where like your damage meters aren't really judged and you're kind of just like there vibing and you're like buffing your teammates, I think is great.
I 100% agree with Grell. I don't think it's a problem for everyone except for the very top 1%. So I don't think they should add a 7th tank spec. Especially when there's only two spots in a raid and 1 spot in a dungeon.
Mm-hmm. All right, next question. Shred asks, I love Mythic Plus and been getting better throughout the time doing it as a DPS. Of course, like so many others, I play the wrong spec. Barrel Druid. So you're capped at as far as you can go via LFG. I do have friends that are also all DPS. Most of them either got lucky and the spec they play is meta or close to it, or they swap to a meta class. So I'm trying to do that as well. Since all of my friends are also DPS, I chose to level a tank, Blood Death Knight, which at the time of leveling was actually a pretty decent pick, but not necessarily the meta. I've also picked up, and I'm leveling, a Disc Priest. This brings me to my question, and it's probably something I don't know if you three really deal with, but how do you stop from being so scared out of your mind of doing keys on these characters? I'm basically paralyzed with anxiety every time I think of queuing for a key. For example, my Druid is 2800 IO. So I've done all 11s and a few 12s. I'm now starting out on these 2s just to get a feeling for the tanking and the healing. Recently queued for a +3 Arcar on my Priest, and before I did, I was just thinking of everything at the beginning of the dungeon, and the second mini-boss that does the pulsing AoE, and the first boss that does a similar mechanic. I looked at it for 2 to 3 minutes thinking of how stupid this is, that I can't even play, though I really want to play it. I finally did queue, but by then it was too late, and they took another healer. Tragic. I had a somewhat sigh of relief almost, and then went on to the next key to try and end up doing something similar before I came here to write this down. I do suffer with anxiety, so obviously this doesn't help the situation, and it probably is where this is coming from, but I generally do not have this problem with queuing for DPS, but it does happen from time to time. Thank you for your input.
Booze.
Immediately right off the bat, what I'm going to say, I feel like I understand where you're coming from with the anxiety on this. I will say what you actually should be doing is you should actually get your homies and like who are also re-rolling characters and be doing keys together. I think that especially whenever you're jumping from a DPS specialization to like a tank or a healer, the biggest thing you actually need is people to just like let you mess up that aren't going to judge you like at all. Like especially if you're Disc Priest. We talked about the ramps earlier on in this episode. It's a spec that you can completely ruin your ramp and just annihilate your group and they just die. And so there is a level of punishment. Same with tank. Your tank can walk into a pack and get one shot under 0. And so there is this anxiety of, if I make a mistake, I'm going to completely ruin the key. And I think that that's not something that DPS necessarily have, although they're trying to give that to you with Challenger's Peril, but you still don't really have it. But I think that the best thing that you can do to actually help solve this is just like playing in a low stress environment where people are going to kind of let you fuck up and they aren't going to judge you for it. And they're going to let you have that progression over time. I think that will at least help alleviate some of the stress. What I'm going to say about this +3 is if you're already timing 11s and 12s on a different character, you're probably well more than capable of doing a +3 on any spec.
Bro, the shit that I've seen out of Disc Priest and +3s, bro, you'll be fine.
You can
just karate chop your keyboard and walk in the dungeon, you'll be fine if you're doing 10s on another character.
Yeah, you don't even have to like heal in a +3. Nobody's going to die to like the first boss of Arakara or the mini boss. Like that doesn't even do 100% of your HP.
Yeah, so I'm gonna maybe disagree a little bit here, but you can pick and choose whatever answer you want. I think anxiety comes a lot from unfamiliarity, and I think that unfortunately one of the best ways to deal with it, it's not easy, and you never want to do this, especially as, you know, someone who's frequently anxious about things, is to dive into the deep end and do the thing that scares you, right? But when, you know, I think if you pussyfoot around a little bit and you don't, you know, you kind of like slowly step in, like eventually you're going to have to dive in the deep end and it's going to be scary as shit and you're going to have to deal with it, right? Like, I think that actually doing like 2s and 3s or like very, very low keys, especially if you know what it's like to do higher keys, can actually be detrimental to you as a healer or a tank because you don't actually know what it's like. Like you don't actually learn how to play your class when you're way over geared and you're just sort of like walking around. Like is your chance for blowing up your group very, very low? Yes, but ultimately, like you have to sort of face your fears anyway. An example of this, a little bit different because I've been playing classic hardcore, but I've been playing with this tank who is not a native WoW player, but he does play WoW. And he basically, you know, he's like, I really want to tank for like the new guildies and stuff, but I don't really know that much about the dungeons. And, you know, it's been great playing with you because you've helped me feel more safe. Well, you know, we've been playing together a lot. And then just the other day, he had to play with a healer that was basically brand new, fresh leveled up or whatever. And I'm like, so how do you feel? And he's like, I'm fucking terrified. Like, all the prep that we did doesn't matter. Like, eventually you're just going to go in and you're going to have some dog shit healer in a dungeon where your character gets deleted if you die and you're going to have to face your fears. And no amount of, like, preparation or whatever is going to prevent that anxiety. Yeah. And you just have to do it. Like, you just have to go into a 12 key or as a healer or as a tank and just blow your group up and be flamed and get kicked. And, you know, eventually you'll learn that things will be okay.
I mean, we have another. You
never want to, like, I can relate a lot, not really with gaming, but with other things, like really wanting to take it slow and just like be easy and like kick the can and like not dive in. But if your real goal, like you just have to sit down at the end of the day and think like, is my goal to do these keys. Do I really want to do these keys as a tank or healer? If the answer is yes, like just go, just get into the key, do it, grief somebody's key, blow it up, learn that it's not so bad, and move on. If you're just playing for fun, then whatever, like do whatever you want. Dude, you can do 3s as discipline priest for the rest of your life if that's what's fulfilling and fun for you, and you don't want to like grief people's high keys. But if your goal is to do high keys, you just have to get in there, and no amount of +3s on a tank or a disc priest is going to prepare you for what a 12 is.
I have an anecdotal example of this as well. We have a friend I'm playing with. His name's Morning. He's playing a DK right now. I don't think Frost DK does that great of damage, especially in like super high level keys. You could either have like a world class enhancement shaman and play with a Frost DK, or you can have a normal enhancement shaman and play with probably you want something else, like a Moonkin or a mage, or another DPS that probably does a little bit more damage because it's going to help you do a little bit higher keys. He has only ever done 11s on the Survival Hunter. And today we are going to be bringing him to 15s and 16s. And at some point you just kind of have to make that jump. And I think that doing it with friends that aren't going to judge you if you just make mistakes the first time through is probably the most important thing that you can possibly do. Like Growl said, you just
that's a good middle ground. Don't Tettles isn't necessarily saying do +3s with friends, but like if you're gonna do the harder shit that's scary, like do it with people who are I think
10s with your friends. Like if you've done 11s and 12s, I think that 10s, they're a couple levels below what you've done in your Feral Druid. You don't have the guile on it. It should be appropriate for you and your friends to be able to do, and I think that that's a good learning ground for you.
I mean, I also struggle with anxiety, not only in WoW but other games as well. Finding your crew, like as the others have said, finding people that support you no matter what. That's ultimately what you're looking for as someone with anxiety.
Yeah.
Right? Like a place where you can laugh off your mistakes, no matter how stupid or, boneheaded that mistake might be. A place that you can just be like, yeah, that was dumb. I will learn from that. And everybody's just like, you go, man. You got this. Like, those are the people that you want to be around. I feel at times like playing shooters with some of my friends who are just utterly amazing at shooters, and I'm dead on the ground while my team carries me to a victory, and I just feel like crap because I was dead. And
dude, that was me with the no, that was me whenever we played Warzone, and I'd run around with a rocket launcher the entire time, and I wouldn't do shit. I literally just ran around with the rocket launcher every single time I could.
And the 1 out of 10 games would find a car and blow it up for us, and we were like, "Yeah, you go, Tettles." Like that's what you're looking for. You're finding a crew that supports you no matter what. That's how you like, and playing with pugs, playing with people you don't know. Yeah, there's still going to be anxiety there. But when you play, like Growl said, the people that you play with, that you enjoy with, that you can have fun with,
absolutely.
That's how you kind of go forwards.
Okay, so Squishy, you have a final segment?
Yeah, they just buffed the ring. So
another episode of the bench.
Welcome to today's hot fixes on the PTR. They just buffed the hot fixes or they just sent hot fixes for the ring. They buffed certain procs by like anywhere from 10 to like 40%. So it's probably now about equal to an equivalent high level ring, or maybe slightly better. We'll have news probably tomorrow from our data.
Is there even a WoW? There's not even a WoW head post on this.
No, there's not.
That's kind of perfect, right? That's about where it should be. Like if you want to make your guy a little bit stronger, but you don't feel like you need to farm it for next year, that's probably a good spot, right?
I think so.
I think it should be Abyss. Like I think it should probably be Abyss ring, but like
after 6 weeks, I think it should be slightly better than better.
Yes, but it shouldn't be next year's ring as well. Like I think that's what the amulet kind of messed up on, is that it ended up turning into like next year's ring as well.
Or the expansion log one.
Yeah, well, okay, well that was just if you're a Resto Shaman, of course.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah.
Anything else for this week's episode? All right. I think that's gonna be it for us this week. Shout out the fans, shout out Wowhead, shout out the viewers, shout out the commenters, and we will see you guys next week. Goodbye.
What an outro.